hear me okay at the back? You may not want to, but okay, it's close enough. I do just need to make an announcement before I start on the agenda. Excuse me for reading it, but it's much easier this way. I'm Councillor Carol Jewell and I chair the Planning Committee, which consists of 9 elected borough councillors, supported by a range of professional officers. It is the committee's responsibility to determine a planning application using current national and local planning policies and other relevant planning considerations. There's a formal set of procedures which must be adhered to. Firstly, the planning officer will present the application, and then only those speakers who are registered to speak will be invited to address the committee with a strict time limit of 3 minutes. No one else, including borough, town and parish councillors, agents, applicants, objectors or supporters, are permitted to address the committee, ask questions or interject into the meeting. Everyone has had the opportunity to comment on each application through the consultation process. Once the representations have been made, the committee will discuss and debate an application, seeking clarification from the council's professional planning officers where necessary. We can only focus on the proposal before us. Our role is not to suggest alternatives, nor consider the need for the development or whether it's too costly or whether there are alternative uses of the site or more suitable uses of land elsewhere. Planning proposals can often generate strong opinions both for and against the development, but committee business needs to be conducted in a professional and orderly manner without interruption from the public gallery. As chair, I have the discretion to remove individuals from the meeting in accordance with point 8.2.6 of the council's constitution. This includes suspending the meeting and or terminating the webcasting of the meeting. Thank you very much. We move on to the agenda. The first item is apologies. I'm looking around the room. I don't think there are any, so I'll move on. The next item is the minutes of the previous meeting. Can I see all those in favour of those minutes, please? Anybody against? Any abstentions? Thank you very much. The next item is declaration of interest. Is there anybody that has an interest to declare?
Thank you. I've got to declare an interest in agenda item 39, application number 232704. I'll be speaking though as in my role as a borough councillor on this one, not as a member of the planning committee.
Thank you, Sam. Next item is applications to be deferred and withdrawn. I don't believe there are any. So we'll move on to the application 232704, Land West of Park Lane, Charville. If I move to the officer to take that on, please.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening all. This is application 232704 to Land West of Park Lane in Charville. This is a full planning, outline planning application almost for the proposed erection of up to 75 dwellings with access only considered, combined with the quantum and the principal development. The reserve matters are appearance, landscaping, layout, and scale, and these will be scrutinised at a later date if the application at outline stage is acceptable. Moving on to the site itself. It is located adjacent to the settlement limits of Charville, which is a limited development location. The site itself does technically fall within the designated countryside. However, it forms a logical extension of the Charville settlement to provide much needed homes and affordable homes within the borough. The site is quite unique in the fact that the perception of the site from the street scene is quite limited, and the landscape character and character impacts reflect this in the fact that there are quite limited impacts in this respect. The site itself is sandwiched in between built development to the north, to the east, and to the south, and it is bound by large trees and hedgerow to the western boundary. The settlement limits of Charville, again, are shown in this comparative picture, with the site shown in red at the bottom. Now, the settlement limits of Charville were informed by built form, but this did not account for the 25 units directly adjacent to the site, which again heavily informs its character as being informed by residential form on site. Moving on to the existing site and the existing views from Park Lane. As I've said, given the fact that the site essentially wraps around existing built form, the perception of openness of the field is not very appreciable from the street scene at all, as the images show. The site itself is currently used as a temporary builder's compound, and the remainder of the site is scrub land, which is not currently used for any purpose, though historically there's been some weekend motor racing and there's been the grazing of horses, but these uses have ceased. This has left the site sitting prone to a more efficient use of the land, particularly addressing the borough's housing need at this time. To the top left-hand side of your screen, you will see the adjoining dwellings at Canberra Lake Way. To the bottom left-hand side of your screen, you'll obliquely see, the homestead, which is a light industrial estate. And to the right, you'll see the remaining scrub of the site. However, obliquely again, in the bottom right-hand side of your screen, you'll see the Hawthorns major development, which forms the northern site boundary of the application site. Now, other than the principle and quantum of development that's proposed, access is proposed as well. And this is in the form of a singular vehicular access from Park Lane. Highways have not objected to this application on highway safety purposes, and the detailed design of the access will be secured in two stages, one being a planning condition, one being the relevant highways agreement following this application. Alongside the access, 2-metre pavements have been indicated to run alongside the sites, and speaking more generally about highways impact, the trip generation proposed in line with the borough's own accredited trip rates would be very low in the context of the overall area. The T-RICS data, which is nationally accredited, states that the vehicular traffic along Park Lane, again, is limited. Is evident from the site that it's not a particularly busy road, though it is adjacent to the Charville Piggott School, which does fluctuate from time to time, and the T-RICS data accounts for that. Alongside the vehicular access itself, through discussion with various ward members, the applicant, and informally, a informal pedestrian crossing improvement has been secured through the provision of a coloured surface. This builds on the existing tactile pavement and creates the perception of a pedestrian right-of-way for school children using the Charville Piggott School. This not only benefits existing residents of Charville, but it also benefits the future residents who will occupy the development. And again, the detailed design of this will be informed by the relevant highways agreement. Turning to the site itself, the principal consideration in this application is 75 dwellings sufficient for the site? Now, the applicant has clearly demonstrated that yes, that is the case through a density of 10.7 dwellings per hectare, which in the context of development is incredibly low. Now, using a comparative analysis of the Hawthorns to the north of the application site, that achieves a density of 15.87 dwellings per hectare. The adjoining Canberra Lake Way achieves 14.04 dwellings per hectare, and the site is significantly below that, which accounts for its edge of settlement location and blurs the lines for a more smooth and landscape-led introduction into the countryside, which does not exist at current. Turning to the overall housing mix which is shown, Charville is predominantly occupied by your larger family dwellings of detached nature. This application has demonstrated the intent to change that positively by providing a mixed vernacular of homes from various terrace houses, semi-detached houses, and again also Charville's prevailing character, which is matched with your larger family homes. This creates more opportunity, which will be scrutinised at reserved matters, for a more mixed community, for more opportunities for first-time buyers, for people looking to downsize, and that does not exist within the settlement at the moment. And this application directly addresses that. Further, when considering does a site constitute overdevelopment, green infrastructure is a very good indicator of that. And I think it's important to first say that the site, 5 hectares out of the 6.97 hectares is permeable. And there's a 269% over provision of public green space offered. This is indicative only. However, the parameters are very important in determining does this quantum of development work? And the answer in officer's professional view is yes. On this subject, the overall parameters plan for open space shows that you'll have a mixture of semi-natural green space, public open space, amenity grass, play areas, and allotments all on site. Now, whilst a cascade mechanism will feature in the legal agreement, if this shan't be delivered, what the parameters plan clearly shows is that there's plenty of space for this to do so. And that results in a 269% increase over the TB08 standards, combined with a 1.7 hectare over provision on the site, which is nothing short of enormous. Moving to the indicative visuals along Park Lane, as mentioned, the strong sense of containment of the site limits landscape character and character impacts, which followed from a no objection response from WBC Trees and Landscape. And again, landscaping is a reserved matter. However, this indicates and strongly shows that with a slightly shifted access and a landscaping plan, which we've secured by condition, that the site will be heavily screened and will conform with the overall character of the area. And here's another indicative visual showing what the inside of the site could look like. Again, the fact that the intention is for this to be a landscape-led approach with ecological permeability, enhancements for special species that reside on the site, and a greater habitat provided, as well as allowing residents to interact with that nature, which again, other than the country park, is something missing inside of a residential development in Charleville. And the applicant's intention is to provide this in future. I think it's also very important on the subject of housing to note that this is an application proposing 40% affordable housing, and the intention is for this to be delivered on site. This is 30 homes within a limited development location or just outside of, and within the countryside that can provide affordable housing on the site again, which is, there's no viability case here. The intention is to provide this on site. So to conclude, the offer's recommendation is to grant planning permission, and this is subject to the conditions and informatives listed within Appendix 1 of the committee reports. The completion of an associated Section 106 legal agreement and the heads of terms are listed within the recommendation of the committee reports, or alternatively, in the unlikely event that the Section 106 is not signed and completed within 6 months or an otherwise agreed period by officers, to authorise refusal of planning application. Now, ordinarily, I would stop talking, so I must apologise, but we do have two updates this evening to present to members. Update 1 being a very minor typo that we noticed. So this referred to condition 10, which is our carbon neutral homes condition, or the aim to provide this in future, subject to a verification statement. And it states this must be in accordance with conditions 36, 37, and 38. This was a typographic error, and it should instead read conditions 7, 8, and 9. So just a minor typo. The update 2 is the intention for officers to propose a standard Thames water condition concerning foul water infrastructure improvements, which will be viewed in conjunction with Thames Water. And whilst the Water Act predicates this to some degree anyway, without double counting, it's important that these details are secured. So that's proposed by officers as your update. Thank you all for listening. More than happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Ben. Just for members' information, the supplementary agenda shows the obligations, conditions, informatives and obligations on the original in the green set there. We've got some words missing. So if anybody wanted the full sentence, that's in the supplementary agenda. Okay, we can then move on to our registered speakers. And the first one is Rob Jones from Parish Council. Rob, I'm sure you're well aware of the 3 minutes. We'll start when you're settled. Yes, of course, and you need to press your microphone. Yeah.
Sorry, can I get a 1 minute warning before the end? Yeah, thank you. Good evening, I'm Rob Jones, Chair of Charleville Parish Council. There's been a significant volume of objections in Charleville to the development of this site, both as part of this application and its inclusion in the local plan update. To put it bluntly, as a community, we feel our views have been ignored. In the Planning Department report, the site has been described as moderately sustainable, but we do not feel that this reflects the lived reality of Charleville residents. As a single example, the report states there are multiple bus stops with frequent services available with an attractive walking environment of just over 600 metres. This is simply incorrect. Our own analysis using Parish Online Isochrone tool shows none of the site is reachable in 7 minutes, and the vast majority of the site is over 10 minutes walk of a bus stop and beyond Sustrans' definition of a reasonable distance. As they do now, people will use their cars, furthering Charleville's car dependency with car ownership levels in Charleville far beyond national and Wokingham levels. That's from the 2021 census. This will add further existing to issues regarding pollution, CO2 emission, road safety and congestion. There are many other similar examples in the report in which the reality differs from the how the issue is presented in the report. Notwithstanding our dissatisfaction with the report, I would like to make the following comments. Road crossing. The road suffers from persistent speeding. We see that from our parish speed indicator device data. A safe crossing is essential. That offered so far is considered unsatisfactory, and the reasons for not providing a zebra crossing or similar, poor at best. Sinkholes. We welcome the survey undertaken by the applicant and the engineering report commissioned by WBC. Issues with the site are clearly laid out, but our concern remains that the issue is not sufficiently understood, nor the impacts of any mitigations on surrounding buildings and land, including who would ultimately be responsible, clear. We would prefer investigations are completed before any building commences. Sorry, before any planning permission is granted. Sinkholes are not a
You have
possibility.
1 minute.
Okay. Sinkholes are not a possibility. They are a reality at this location. The site needs to be able to deliver the housing safely. NHS doctor surgery contribution. We would like to clarify why this request isn't being met, as it's not clear from the report. Significant numbers of residents' comments have highlighted local overwhelmed GP services. We don't understand why it's like some clarity. We broadly welcome the design and recognise the high quality nature of Hicks Homes. We also value the play area, allotments and green space within the design. We would like to see more effort towards net zero housing in the village. A recently completed report for the Parish Council by the Centre for Sustainable Energy indicates Charlwell has a very high CO2 footprint compared to Woking and nationally. Already, solar panels are being retroactively fitted in Canberra Way. The desire and demand is clearly there. Also, we're keen that any development delivers the commitment to affordable homes. Recent analysis by the Parish Council.
Could you conclude now, Rob, please?
Sorry. Okay. Of the housing market in LSOAs covering Charlwell show an average sale price of £765,000 in 2022 versus a gross average income for Charlwell of £69,900. First time buyers are priced out of the village.
Thank you very much. The next person to speak is Deirdre Wells, the agent. Deirdre, do you want a warning or are you okay?
I'm sorry?
Do you want a 1 minute warning or are you okay?
Yes, that would be kind. Thank you. Am I switched on so that everyone can hear me? Right. Good evening. And thank you for those of you who made the site visit last week. Members, I think you'll all be aware that the settlement boundaries set out in the 2010 core strategy are historic and have had to be breached on many occasions in order to deliver sufficient housing to accord with national policy. And your officers explained tonight that because of the tilted balance, there are sound grounds for approval now. In all three versions of the local plan update, this site has been allocated for new housing with a point of access exactly where we've put it on our application. So the site has been tested in principle and consulted upon over several years and in competition with alternatives. It is now the only site in Charlwell which is supported by the local plan. While it's in outline, we've gone to a great deal of trouble to provide as much information as possible on all potential impacts of the development. And I would actually emphasise the fact, as the officers have pointed out, that a lot of matters are covered by building regulations and other legislation and don't need to be reiterated in planning decisions. The applicant is a long-established local developer employing local tradespeople, has a record of building high-quality new homes, together with delivering all the benefits, not arguing or trying to reduce them. We've engaged throughout the process with the Parish Council and accommodated all feasible requests. On all matters where questions have been raised, we've responded positively with more technical information, even when this has been extremely unusual. So you can be confident in approving this application. What will be delivered will be a very well contained site, retaining all existing woodland boundaries, hedgerows, up to 75 family homes at a lower density than anything else adjoining. A safe access, improved pedestrian and other movement infrastructure.
You've got 1 more minute.
More than double the required on-site landscape open space, 30 affordable new homes, measures to fully offset impact on wildlife and to enhance future biodiversity, permanently reduce surface water runoff, and a very substantial financial contribution towards local infrastructure. I've got a note of it being over 3 million. This project meets all your requirements without any deficiencies, and approval today will improve the borough's housing delivery, so reduce the risk of less successful development on other sites. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you. The next one is the ward member, Catherine Harding.
Okay, thank you. Many residents in Charville have expressed their understanding of the need for new housing and acknowledge that many of us, including my family, live in developments that were opposed by existing residents at the time. However, this application represents meaningful settlement growth in designated countryside adjacent to a limited development location, which is against policy. This continues the pattern of successive growth of the village through moderate-sized developments, leading to a community bisected by the A4 with limited local services and inadequate infrastructure to meet the needs of now over 3,000 residents. Charville residents must travel for essential services such as early years education, primary healthcare, and most food shopping, or even basic leisure such as a cafe. Although these services are within 2 miles, which is an ideal cycling distance, very few people cycle due to particularly safety concerns on the Old Bath Road to Twyford. For pedestrians, this key route is also inadequate. Walking takes at least 20 minutes each way, and there is insufficient space to pass other pedestrians without stepping into the road. The officer's report places emphasis on the good 850 bus service to mitigate the sustainable travel challenges of the site. However, this service has only been operating at a good frequency for 3 months and could be altered with just 70 days' notice. The walk to the bus stop takes longer than the drive all the way to Twyford station, not accounting for any waiting time, time on the bus, or the additional 7-minute walk from the bus stop in Twyford to the station itself. As a result, residents like those now will drive or get a lift to the station or other Twyford amenities. Any increase in traffic along Park Lane adds to existing safety concerns for primary school pupils and issues with the roundabout with Old Bath Road. Another key concern for current and future residents is the strained capacity of local healthcare services, particularly at Twyford Surgery, as highlighted by the Integrated Care Board. This issue will only worsen as the village continues to grow unless the healthcare services are expanded alongside new development. I also note the supplementary agenda highlighted Thames Water capacity issues. We do acknowledge that the proposed site has been in the draft local plan since the Reg 18 consultation in 2020 under the previous council administration and remains part of the emerging local plan update. The indicative layout includes positive features such as a mix of housing types, allotments, green space and a play area. If this outline application is approved, it is crucial that these elements are secured in the final delivery and do not become diluted as the project progresses. And finally, in light of the climate emergency, it is essential that all new development is designed to last for generations and is future-proof to achieve net zero carbon emissions and address future water scarcity. Building homes which do not deliver low carbon energy and lower bills for future homeowners is simply not a viable option anymore, and I welcome the conditions recommended to bring the homes aligned with the new policies. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. I have Sam Akhtar, the ward member, has registered. There are 10 seconds left of the 3 minutes, Sam. So I think you need to be very concise. So let me know when you want to start.
Firstly, this proposal could exacerbate traffic congestion on Park Lane, which is already a narrow and heavily used road. The influx of vehicles from additional 75 homes will increase pressure on the local road network, posing risks to road safety and residents. We have no doctor surgery in the village, no local amenities, oversubscribed schools, so I strongly object to this development. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. That was very, very concise. Yeah. Okay, so that's all the people that registered to speak. All right. Okay. Right, we'll now go into committee. Who would like to start? Don't be shy.
I would ask, do we have a 5-year land supply? Yes or no? And what happens if we don't have a 5-year land supply? Can't the government take over our planning department and just tell all the developers, build wherever you like, build whatever you like, because we don't have a 5-year land supply?
I think these are rhetorical questions, but yes.
Yes. Well, those are the kind of things we have to look at, the tilted balance as well, because we don't have a 5-year land supply. Is it an ideal place? Probably not. But we don't have much of a choice. We only have certain places, and it is in the local plan update. So therefore, it's presumed that it should be approved. At least that's what I believe, is the idea. Thank you.
Thank you, Rochelle. Brian, did you want to come in?
Yeah, just to jump in on that point, just to make members of the committee aware, in your supplementary, you'll see an update of applications decisions that have been approved, that have been refused despite the tilted balance. And so for the members of the public's benefit and members of the committee, just because a council does not have a 5-year, or in this case for our council, a 4-year housing land supply, does not mean automatically development is approved. We, as a local planning authority, still have a duty to consider every application in front of us. And today, another major application was refused under delegated powers within the borough, and there's one listed in your supplementary agenda, which was refused last week. So just to put that in context for any members of the public watching.
Thank you, Brian. Anybody, other members of the committee? Yes, Wayne.
I'll start, but this is going to take quite some time. Yes, I think you might get your wish soon, because Angela Rayner is preparing to get rid of planning committees. So we might not be here in a month. Some might say that's a good thing. Some might not. I think in context to what Brian has just said, that we now are at Regulation 19, and having spent 6 days at an inquiry, which is probably 200 yards away from this site, where we would argue that particular site wasn't sustainable, the barrister in question would argue it was. Regulation 19 carries little weight, if any. And I also mentioned the fact that this was and is in the Regulation 19 in the LPU. So on that basis, we need to take that into consideration. I want to come back to conditions later. I did mention to Ben this week, and he's mentioned it in the update about Thames Water, and this doesn't concern me. This does concern me as a ward member. It won't be for the developer, but it will be for the area and for all of us, because Thames Water are saying they can't guarantee at this stage that they have capacity for this site, and this site is only 75. Just up the road, you've got 200 at Bridge Farm, and potentially if it goes through 230 at Riverways Farm, that excludes the 2 lots that have been approved at Sonning. So how they're going to get the capacity for 600 where they can't get it for 75 is worrying for us, you know, especially when over the last week, in some days, 18 hours of stuff has been pushed into the river because the pumping station at Wargrave can't cope with it. It's very difficult. Sustainability, there's various things that have been mentioned by residents, which makes it very difficult for this committee. I fully understand what they're saying around sustainability, but then you have to take into account the appeal site next to this particular site for 25 was approved. Infrastructure. What say do we have on infrastructure? I agree with residents around healthcare, 100%. But what say do we have? Interesting, at the inquiry on the site just down the road, at the round table, the healthcare professionals were there, which I thought, I've never seen that before. And I think that's a great thing. And I think we take money off a developer for all sorts of things. Perhaps we should use a bit of that money we take off developers to help us in healthcare. And I'll come back to conditions, because they're willing to pay the money. So we should be willing to put it where it's needed and by what residents want. I absolutely agree with what Catherine said about the bus service. You hear great things about the 850 bus service at the moment in that area, where you get a regular service every 15 minutes, but it's short term. And I'll come back to the condition on my journey in a moment, because again, if the developer is willing to put money into the 106 and via SIL, which they have to, then this should be directed in the most appropriate ways that helps our residents. I know it was raised on the site visit around sinkholes, and I know that is a very big issue for Charville. And The reason why Charville Parish Council were probably very concerned about it, because they had to pick up some of the costs on a recent issue they had in the car park, which they hadn't budgeted for and was a lot of money. So I can understand why Rob, the chair of Charville Parish Council, is concerned. I'm going to come on to crossings. Now, I understand, and I have spoken to Gordon about this. This has been an issue for years. Not in the recent 2 years. This has been an issue for a long time, and residents are not happy, as I understand it, with the coloured tarmac versus a proper crossing. Now, as I understand it, Gordon, there is nothing stopping the local parish council, including the 2 borough councillors just gone out the door and me, pushing this council to have a proper crossing there. There's nothing stopping us doing that, is there?
There's nothing stopping you doing so. It'll have to go through the technical approval process.
Yep.
May come at the end of it, you may not, the technical approval process may say no or may say yes, but there's no problem with that.
Right. Okay. So we're getting money. We're getting a lot of money. And if it's important for this community to have a crossing, then that's the route we must take, regardless. Yep. And we will obviously, when it comes back to reserve matters, if we don't get in there, we'll have another go some other way, because I'm going to come on to SIL money in a moment. Because I think that if it's an issue, and it will get worse, because 75, well, let's just take it roughly 320, 330 people might live on this site, roughly. You know, so I think that's an important issue. Now, the other thing I want to come on to is SUDS. And interesting, when I've asked this question very recently, I didn't realise that this council don't have a policy for adopting a SUD system. How many times have we heard about the issues about SUDs, attenuation basins, swales, etc.? Now I'm being told there is no adoption process to do that. Or am I wrong?
If you don't mind, Councillor, sorry.
Yeah, no.
Yes, in a word. If you look at South Wokingham, that there are various examples of SUDS basins that we have.
Right, well, that's interesting, because when I was asking regarding riverways, they said there is no policy because we haven't adopted any. But hold that thought, right? Because I'm more worried about the longevity of the site, because they are a concern, as we know, across the borough. So I just want to make sure we get everything right. You want me to stop there, or do you want me to start going on about SIL and 106?
I've got 3 questions, I think, from what you just said. Maybe we take those first before they're lost.
Yep.
If I could ask for the officers' comments. One was about healthcare and whether or not that could be conditioned in any way. The crossing was another issue, and that final one about the SUD system. Do you have any comments at all, Ben?
Yeah, absolutely. We can definitely start on healthcare. So notwithstanding the fact that locally this is a contentious issue, with planning applications, you need to comply with S122 for securing a planning obligation. There are 3 tests, and ultimately, if a contribution is not justified, it is not officers' jobs, and it's certainly not residents' jobs or members' jobs to breach section 122 of the SIL regs. It needs to be necessary to make the application acceptable. It needs to be justified as to where this funding will go. The response we received from the ICB, the consultant actually said to me in an email that he wasn't sure it met the tests. So it's not our role as officers to try to overcome shortcomings in justification, notwithstanding what residents perceive quite rightly it could be a problem. If this justification is not there, we cannot secure it. It is a matter of law. It's not at my discretion. It's not at anyone's discretion. It's a matter of law.
Thank you. And the other one was the crossing, although I think that was partly answered, wasn't it? And the subsystem, we're fairly positive there is a policy.
So I'm not sure what we mean by a policy for SUDS adoption. Numerous SUDS have been adopted in the borough on highway verges and greenways and SANGs, etc. We take on these areas, we take on this responsibility. Now, I'm unaware of any document which breaks down what you need to do, capacity, etc. But there is supplementary planning guidance on designing well-built SUDS. But I don't think that has anything to do whatsoever with adoption. Adoption has gone through a completely separate process to planning. Amendments can be made. And frankly, adoption, we've secured through the Section 106, details of management company, details of adoption. So there is the option of either. But enforcing one or the other, again, we cannot do, to put it short, I'm afraid.
Yeah, sorry, you're absolutely right. I'm just saying that, as I understand it, not confusing this with highways verges, we don't have a policy for SUDS adoption. That's what I've been told. Also, you mentioned the point around healthcare. I don't understand then why an inquiry inspector allowed somebody from the a healthcare professional to come to a round table to discuss conditions. So how does that work?
So everything is case by case, essentially. Justification might be made for planned works in one area or one surgery, but frankly, if it's not written down and justified in one application, just because it's been justified in another one, there's different numbers, there are different calculations, different net increases in population. Sorry, it's case by case. We can't have a blanket approach to this when individual justification is needed to meet the SIL tests.
Yeah,
they're application specific.
It's only 100 yards down the road, and they're still going to use the same doctor surgery. Anyway, we'll leave that because I've made my point. Now, one of the biggest issues is, as was mentioned by Catherine, was the issue of what's been promised to Charville with regard to the LC whip. And again, I'm going to say this because I think it's important to the residents of Charville. The council are getting, the Royal We are getting a lot of money out of this development. Now, my journey, that's going to give us 40 grand. 40 grand ain't going to put the spade in the ground for this LC whip. This LC whip 2 years ago was valued at 2 million. So what is the price of that now? So how do we condition it? I'm not worried about. I'm more worried about we're getting the money. How are we going to make sure that Charville gets this money? Because if somebody tells me that, oh, we've built new roads, etc., in the north of the parish, you haven't. And I appreciate a lot of the money has to go to the south of the borough because that's who've taken the houses. But when I add up all the potential houses coming with 100 yards of the A4, that's £55 million worth of SIL. And this application is including 106, well, excluding 106, is between 7 and 8 million. So we're getting a large chunk of it, and we want commitments that we're going to get some of the infrastructure that Charville needs. Not a My Journey 40 grand. That doesn't get us anywhere. That doesn't even get us the signage. So these are all the issues that surround this application. I know we're in a rock and a hard place. Having sat through this inquiry, if this gets refused tonight and it goes to appeal, and we're up against the likes of the barristers that we were up against 2 weeks ago, this council gets hammered, absolutely hammered, to the point where it's embarrassing. So we've got to try and make sure that if this goes through tonight, we get the proper conditions so the people of Charville can see that we've done our best for them.
Thank you, Wayne. Can I ask about those conditions? Because it was something I raised on the site visit about the money for My Journey. because, as you say, it's not really going to make a huge amount of difference for the things that need to be done. It seems to be a standard amount of money each time we have these planning applications. Is that a movable feast, Ben? Is that something we can discuss and look at?
Chair, the My Journey is alternative to the developer to do a travel plan, which is the travel plan that sets procedures in place to try and encourage more share from car to walking and cycling. It is not meant to deliver the infrastructure. It is meant to be the softer side, if you like, of a travel plan. It's how to try and encourage people through bike clubs, bike sharing, bike training, and things like that, to encourage people, if they wish, they have an option if they want to. That is what My Journey is for. When you're looking at infrastructure, that's more SIL-based. Councillor Smith has set out, it's the infrastructure side of it. And if we had a proper evaluation of this, I could say, right, there's a contribution that this development could pay, but we don't have a proper value, a proper valuation. And if it was, it'd be a small peanuts, because there's only 70 odd houses. It wouldn't be that much to deliver something. But that's where the difference is. Travel plan is more the softer side of it. What you need is money for the delivery of the infrastructure, which should be through the SIL process.
Thank you. Yes.
So I get that. 40 grand towards the buses, because they've got, as I understand it, seed money that could drop away at any time. And this could be a good help to that service. As I said, so far, the 850, I'm hearing good things about the 850. It's doing a good job, and people, are very happy with what it's doing. But with this infrastructure, I want to go back, because the one point I did miss out, that Charville are going through the process of a neighbourhood plan. They're not quite there yet. It could take another year. But by the time this goes through, if it goes through tonight and gets to reserve matters, gets through his reserve matters, etc., 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 hopefully Charville will be at the point where they have a neighbourhood plan, and that will make a massive difference, because at the moment they would get 120,000. Down the road they could get 1 million, but they need that for important works that they need to do at the pavilion. What I'm more interested in is how they get their chunk from you guys to make sure, because we're getting the money, the developers are putting the money on the table. It's how we get that money and it doesn't disappear off to the Northern Distributor Road. That's my point.
So can I ask, can we leave that to the reserve matters, that discussion about money, sharing out the money, if you like? I know on the site visits, I was looking at how close it is to Twyford Station, with a good footpath going through Charville Country Park. Then you could actually encourage people to walk and cycle. But can it be left to reserve matters?
Thank you, Chair. Just on the point of SIL, Community Infrastructure Levy, this is a flat levy, which is obviously payable on the floor space, the final number of dwellings and its respective floor space, which at the outline stage, we do not know the exact numbers. We know its permission is up to 75, and so therefore the exact numbers may change. What won't change is obviously anything identified on the council's infrastructure delivery plan or anything through the infrastructure funding statement. And obviously, if there are particular projects or key pieces of infrastructure, in order for money to be directed towards those pieces of infrastructure, they would need to be front loaded into the plan. Now, we have for this year already got a very long list, which has already been committed spend for many infrastructure projects, and no doubt next year and the year after. So again, it's not a case of the money just comes and then it just gets thrown out to people to spend as they see fit. What is another certainty with the application is that obviously Charleville Parish Council will get a proportion of the SIL money as all parishes get, depending on how much that is and when that development, if at all, comes forward in the future. So in terms of the community infrastructure levy, projects need to be identified up front. And if, for example, transport, public health, open space identify key projects and they make it onto the list, then funding is pooled from all these developments into those projects. If Charleville Parish Council wish to invest their top slice SIL receipts from any development into a local project that benefits the local parish, that is entirely up to Charleville Parish Council. If I may, just to go back a little bit, whilst we're talking about infrastructure and primary care, doctor surgeries, the situation that local authorities are finding in recent weeks, I would say, and as was referenced by Councillor Smith at a recent public inquiry, is that the Integrated Care Board for our area, which is Buckinghamshire, Oxfordshire and Berkshire, are taking a much more active role in seeking obligations for development, from development for primary care, for in effect doctor surgeries, which are not funded from central government as such. Now it's all very complicated, and obviously the planning committee is not necessarily the right place to talk about funding formulas for public health. But there is no legal requirement for us as a local authority to allocate SIL to primary care. There's nothing forcing the council to use its SIL money for doctor surgeries over parks or roads or, you know, infrastructure projects. So the ICB, Integrated Care Board, is now working actively, as you will have seen and heard in most recent committees. They're working with local councils to explore the potential of having either infrastructure identified in the council's SIL funding statements and infrastructure delivery statements. So, for example, identifying in the future where primary care infrastructure is needed, or alternatively, being consulted on planning applications specifically to secure developer contributions where, for example, a capacity issue exists and there is an identified project to alleviate that capacity issue. Not to pay people to run services, but to pay for capital projects to expand and increase services. So it is quite complicated, but in terms of the application in front of you tonight, it's been with the council a while. Obviously, when you see an application and we are debating it, it's not been submitted last week. Much engagement has occurred. There isn't, at this present time, sufficient justification to meet those three tests my colleague has mentioned earlier, to make it justifiable, directly relevant and reasonable. There may well be capacity issues in the local area, but not necessarily affected by or will be caused by or made worse by this development. So until such time, this particular application, unlike maybe the one at public inquiry, in which a specific expansion, enlargement, alteration of an existing facility was identified and would be affected by the number of houses proposed, the ICB requested to speak and interact and represent and provide evidence at that public inquiry. The council, the local planning authority, we're not responsible for primary care, and therefore it would be unwise for us to come to any conclusions of what's needed or not needed at this meeting. So just to kind of clarify that, because I suspect this will not be the last time this comes up and not the last time this committee is faced with that topic. I'll leave it there for the moment, but I may come back a bit later on the Reg 19 and the LPU. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. That's very helpful. Wayne's raised a good number of points, but obviously if there's anybody else that wants to talk to this application or raise any other issues, please shout now. Yes, Moses.
I think I want to ask maybe simple questions. You talked about bus 850, which I know a little bit about. In terms of existing development, what is your relative distance from the bus stop?
So just working out for the 850 service, just if you enter it on Google Maps, the one closest, which is by the WeWave and the application site, we've calculated, well, Google Maps at the time calculated it's about between a 7 and 8 minute walk. That's purely from Google Maps. We haven't got a special system. It's just the average walking time, average walking speed. What Google says goes in the report. Something as simple as walking distance. Yes, it's identified as a very good service as well as per the 850 and CP6 of the core strategy. And in this respect, people are willing to walk, in this case, 100 meters greater for a good service rather than one on their doorstep, which comes once every 2 hours or twice a day, etc. This is a very good service, and you're willing to travel for better services, better products is a standard human trait. And in that respect, the walking distance is acceptable for the standard of the service.
Does that answer your question, Moses?
Yeah, it does. Okay, maybe just one question. Going back to the drainage on the side, when we visited on Friday, there's evidence of stagnant water, which shows that the water table is a bit high. I'm just wondering if you say infiltration will not be achievable, how effective will swales be for drainage on that side?
Ben, I think you could probably answer that one.
Thank you, Chair. The site naturally drains current due to the big AOD differences from the top of the site and the bottom of the site, which naturally flows into the ordinary watercourse. Now, with the banks of earth, etc., that act as natural barriers, you will see stagnant water. However, profiling works occur with any new development, and this will all be subject to consideration of reserve matters to make sure that the natural topography is influencing the design to ensure that the surface water funnels down to the proposed discharge point of the ordinary watercourse. I mean, that requires separate approval and consideration itself. So to answer your question, Moses, I suppose reserve matters will tell all. This is just to show that the capacity is there to cater for this drainage.
Thank you, Ben. Anybody else want to raise anything? Yes, Greg.
Chair, I'd like to ask the Highways Officer to elaborate for me on page 16. There's a reference in 4th paragraph down about 43 two-way trips. I heard earlier some concern about congestion and problems with access with this road. Could you please provide some elaboration about how you've come to this 43 two-way trips, please?
Yes, as I've mentioned before in other planning committees, the nationally accepted means of calculating the trips from a development is based on TRICS database, which is a nationwide database of hundreds and hundreds of sites of different land uses. What has been done is that the borough has its own approved trip rates that have been based on the TRICS database, which the developer has used, and as in accepted elsewhere in the country, the 2 hours that are used are the AM peak and the PM peak, because they tend to be the busiest hours, with the AM peak in particular being higher than the PM peak. And based on the 76 houses and the 75 houses, the trip rates came out as a 43 two-way trips, with the bulk of the trips being coming out, with a lower amount of trips coming in the AM peak. In the PM peak, it's opposite around, but not quite as high. That's where the 43 came from.
Chair, can I just ask a further question? This is to Ben. On page 20, there's reference to a member of Parliament raising about the ground dissolution feature, which I interpret to be a sinkhole. Can you elaborate on how that's been addressed for the committee?
Thank you, sir. Yes. So essentially, whilst generally a building regs requirement, as I explained on the site visit, the entire north of the borough is this chalk substrate that we see. This is nothing new, nothing individual, nothing special as such. It was very untimely that one did appear opposite the application site. But again, the entire north of the borough is this clay substrate. Now, generally speaking, notwithstanding the fact that building regs do address these very, very common instances and happenings within the house building industry, the applicants commissioned a ground radar penetrating survey, which is a very fancy word for a radar on the back of a sled, which is pulled by somebody back and forth over a 7-hectare site to scan for dissolution features or weaknesses in the ground, etc. And given this is a very niche and quite an uncommon area of research that has been carried out, we do not have anyone in the council who specialises in dissolution and ground stability, etc. And as it's a majority of a building regulations requirement, it's something that is usually progressed at that stage. However, by providing this, and unfortunately for the applicant at great cost, we've commissioned our own individual third-party review by South Earthern Environmental, who reviewed the mitigation measures proposed, who have reviewed the area of intrusive features and the parish's concerns, which are absolutely valid, that prior to commencement we need a full picture. The applicant has agreed for an intrusive survey prior to commencement in line with the advice. So every single stage of this process, from theoretical to physical intrusion and then eventually mitigation, that's something that we've considered, our specialists have considered, and it has been carried out to a appropriate standard to overcome the objections received by the Right Honourable Theresa May. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. In fact, I think it's all those investigations, which is why the agenda is so heavy and thick this time. Yes, Moses.
So Ben, this issue of dissolution, does the way I read it here is an issue that will be considered further at reserved matter stage, yes?
So not particularly. It is an issue you could consider principally, if ever, as essentially highlighting, identifying, potentially knowing how to mitigate is an issue that should definitely be factored into account. I mean, the National Planning Policy Framework does outline that ground stability is indeed a material consideration, but it also outlines that sufficient effort can be provided to identify these features. And then once reserved matters come in, etc., I mean, that'll inform things like your ground levels, councillor, that may be informed by having to bank up ground, etc., or finished floor levels to account for different methods of foundations that will come in. So yes, indirectly, but it's an issue we can consider essentially every step of the way until the houses are on the ground.
Thanks very much, Ben. Anybody else want to speak? Martin, did you want to come in at that point?
If there's no further question, maybe I can go through some of the, before we can go through, maybe I thought it might be useful just to go through some of the key planning issues and see if we have alignment or still concerns about that one. So I just want to check with the committee. If we look at the description of the development, as when we visited the site, it was currently used as a temporary builder's yard. It is not accessible to the public, and it is not used as a recreation ground. It's also not considered the best and most versatile agricultural land. Is everybody sort of aligned with that one? Principle of development. Okay, I think Wayne already mentioned it quite clearly on this one. This site is included in the emerging plan and was recently approved. It was so. Do the committee members agree with me that this implies that this site has gone through an extensive plan making assessment and that this site is preferred to other sites that are not in the emerging plan?
I think there were two sites in Charville. One was removed, so there was another site off the A4 that was removed, and this one was left in.
I thought, Chair, you said at the beginning we should treat this application without reference to any other potential site. So I think we should stick to the application.
I think we are. I think it's more of a statement than the comparison. So.
Sorry. And I think it's also just important to note that part of assessing the tilted balance does include, could this happen on another site? So it's not necessarily considering other uses, it's a fundamental assessment that you need to go through when assessing the acceptability of a proposal against the provisions of the tilted balance.
Then on affordable housing, I think this application meets the requirements. It will provide an effective housing mix and also a minimum of 40% of affordable housing, which is needed. The character of the site, I think the density of the dwellings is about less than 11 dwellings per hectare. That is less than compared to Canberra Lake and Hawthorne, so it's not really an overdevelopment. Do you guys agree with that one? I noticed that Wokingham Borough Council Trees and Landscaping has raised no objections. Does anybody has any disagreement with that one? Drainage, I think, Wayne, you mentioned quite a good few points. But I noted that this is in the flood zone 1. So therefore it's subject to a low risk of flooding. Wokingham Borough Council Drainage did not object to the flood risk assessment and drainage strategy report. Thames Water has raised has raised no objections, but I know, Wayne, there is a caveat there for how they can handle that one. But can be addressed at a later stage, I think. And that, I have the impression that the suitable drainage systems can be installed that can cater for the flooding, for the surface water. Does everybody? Yeah. And highways, highways didn't have any objections against the site. Do anybody sort of disagrees with that one? Yeah, go ahead, Ryan.
Only what I'd say is, I'm not going to argue with your trick surveys, but I just want a bit of a reality check. What the community perceives and what they see happens can be quite different.
Yep.
But you've heard what I think we should do at a later date, and I won't go over it again.
No, thank you, Wayne. That's a good point. I think a few people mentioned ground stability, and I did notice that a full radar penetrating survey was conducted. I think Southern Earth Environment said that although there were some limitations with the survey, it was a sound preliminary assessment and had reasonable conclusions, and that additional intrusive survey work will be conducted prior to the commencement of the development. I was just checking if members are satisfied if this issue is sufficiently addressed at this stage. They've done more than normal, I think.
Something goes wrong in the future. So we're insured.
Sustainability, we heard the issues about the SIL money. I think if I hear regulation 122 of SIL, there's no planning obligation is recommended. Is that right?
Sorry, Vice Chair. Yes. So within the recommendation section of the report, I think, forget how many we have. It's around 10 planning obligations. Let me just check. Yeah, if that's all right.
10, 9.
9 planning obligations. Yeah.
You might just want to bring the committee attention to Red 122.
My issue isn't with those 9.
Yeah.
My issue is how we get some of the other money. But I'm going to have to work with my fellow borough councillors to make sure that we get our money in the suitable areas to make sure that we get this infrastructure that was required.
I think the last one I had was local amenities. I think the proposed site can suitably address the separation distances between the different settlements. And it also, I think the distances are such that the proposed distances that overbearing impact on neighboring developments is limited. Is that everybody sort of aligned with that one? I think that is, and then we know we're in the planning balance. We are in a tilted balance environment. So does anybody has anything against sort of these that significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits that we just highlighted?
I think, as I said earlier, one might look at it as we're in between the rock and the hard place, because spatial strategy have chosen this site. If this went to appeal, having just sat through one of the most painful appeals I've ever sat through, the barrister would say, well, you put this site into your local plan, you then included it in your regulation 19, you haven't got a 5-year or 4-year land supply, so what's your defence? And that's what's difficult for us. It's very, very difficult for us on this committee. So that's why I've tried to temper my points this evening on how we get the best for Charleville.
Thank you, Wayne. I was going to say very much the same thing. It is that rock and a hard place again. And I think we've got, this is going to go on, reserve matters, etc. And you're right, we do need to work as a council to make sure that the local community do get every benefit that there is, that we can get for them. I think we've had a good debate and we've certainly covered all of the planning issues now. Has anybody got a recommendation or a proposal for either conditional approval or refusal? If not, I'd like to propose from the chair that we accept the officer's recommendation of conditional approval. Do I have a seconder? Greg, thank you very much. Can I have a show of hands, please? All those in favour of the conditional approval? I think that's unanimous. Thank you very much indeed. We'll just call Sam back in, if that's okay. Okay, we've got our full complement of councillors back again. So moving on to the next item, which is the land at the rear of 6 Johnson Drive, Hinchamstead. Andrew is the officer. Could you, I think, are you ready, Andrew? So I didn't ask you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Bear with me a second just whilst I share my screen. Okay, this is a full application for the erection of 8 4-bedroom dwellings and car canopies or car barns following the removal demolition of existing outbuildings on site. The principle of residential development on the site has already been established by the extant planning permission for 5 dwellings, the reference being 223592. Notwithstanding a previous refusal for 25 dwellings on this site that was dismissed at appeal in 2019. The application site outlined in red here is located on a settlement edge location within the countryside, adjacent to the Finchampstead North Modest Development location. The site lies within the 5-kilometre zone for the Thames Basin Heath Special Protection Area, and the site is located within flood zone 1, where the risk of fluvial flooding is low. The site is relatively flat, with a gradual undulation in levels across the site. The site has an extensive planning history, including enforcement action relating to unauthorised works, including the storage of braking car vehicles, and also other various regular instances of burning materials on site and earth moving works more recently, which have raised concerns from neighbours, as outlined in several objections to the application. However, the Planning Committee has a responsibility to determine the application before them on its individual merits and in accordance with the development plan and any other relevant material planning considerations. Any site owner's past actions or ongoing disputes which fall outside of this proposal cannot be taken into account. Where necessary, these other matters can be dealt with under separate legislation. The Council's Highways Officer has objected to this application on the grounds its unsustainable location, given there has been no change in circumstance since the 2019 appeal, where the inspector raised concerns about the site's unsustainable location for 25 units. However, this objection needs to be considered in light of the extant planning permission for 5 units on site and the small increment of 3 units proposed here. Moreover, any disbenefit of the site's location needs to be weighed against the wider benefits of the scheme. The application site is approximately 1.3 hectares in size and comprises the northern part of the private garden of 6 Johnson Drive, along with the majority of the site which currently forms the builder's storage area, located outside or within existing storage buildings adjacent to the western boundary of the site. The proposed development would be accessed via Johnson Drive and would sit directly east of Tomlinson Drive to the west. A residential similar layout to the consented 5-unit scheme is proposed, but includes smaller, albeit still large dwellings that would have adequate amenity space, off-street parking. The proposed separation distances between each of those existing properties within Tomlinson Drive exceed those advocated within the Council's Borough Design Guide for residential development. The eastern and western boundaries of the site are well screened by mature trees, planting and vegetative cover, and it is proposed to be secured and enhanced via a landscape wildlife area in a similar manner to that secured under the extant permission for 5 units on the site. Measures will also be secured via a planning obligation to ensure that no loss of biodiversity occurs on site as part of the development, in addition to financial contributions towards SANG and SAM measures for the Thames Basin Heath Special Protection Area. Notwithstanding the site falling outside of development limits, the proposed development would be in keeping with the scale and density of surrounding housing in Johnson Drive and Tomlinson Close. The street scene drawing provided here provides a visual interpretation of the front elevation of plots 6, 7 and 8 in the context of existing trees and vegetation that currently exists and would be retained along the eastern and western boundaries of the application site. The proposed 2-storey dwellings would be commensurate with the height and architectural styles of other residential properties in the vicinity, especially those in Johnson Drive and Tomlinson Close seen here. Details of suitable external materials have been supplemented to support the application. In visual terms, the site would also benefit from a resulting loss of the existing buildings yard if the application were to be approved and implemented. While the proposal would result in the loss of comparatively undeveloped site within the countryside, this is not considered to be substantially harmful or visually intrusive. Indeed, the proposal would read as a logical extension to Finchampstead North settlement boundary. Several objections have been received in respect of surface water flooding problems that are currently experienced on Johnson Drive and Tomlinson Drive. Officers acknowledge that this is indeed a problem within these adjacent roads, as evidenced by the attached plan. And the flood risk section of this report on pages 510 to 512 highlights that whilst infiltration of surface water is not achievable on the site, surface water runoff from the development can be controlled at greenfield rates. The precise drainage system for the proposed development has not been provided at this stage, so is recommended to be secured via condition, which will ensure that the system is installed and maintained to avoid any additional flooding events up to and including the 1 in 100 year event with a 40% allowance for climate change. A condition is also recommended to ensure there is no raising of ground levels over and above that required by the development itself. As such, the council's drainage officer confirms that adjoining properties would not suffer from any additional surface water runoff created by the development. Officers assess the proposal in terms of its potential traffic impacts, car parking provision, flooding, drainage, ecology, biodiversity, trees, residential amenity, and no adverse impacts have been identified that are not proposed to be appropriately mitigated for. No net loss of biodiversity would occur, with the potential for some future enhancement. Conditions are recommended to secure full details of sustainable urban drainage measures prior to the commencement of development, in addition to their maintenance. The council's most important policies for determining the application are out of date by absence of the NPPF compliant housing land supply. Paragraph 11D2 of the framework therefore states that permission should be granted unless adverse impacts of doing so would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits when assessed against the policies of the framework taken as a whole, or where there are specific policies in the framework which indicate that the development should be restricted. It should be noted that the previous decision to approve 5 dwellings on the site was made when the council had a deliverable housing land supply of between 4.35 years and 4.29 years. It now only has a supply of 3.2 years. Hence, in this regard, the tilted balance remains firmly engaged, albeit tempered due to past over-delivery. It is recognised that the site is less than optimal location in terms of proximity to existing services and facilities, as identified by the council's highways officer. However, the harm associated with this development is considered very limited, given the principle of residential development has already been established on this site, and that the proposal represents a marginal increase of only 3 units themselves, which also have benefits for the council's housing land supply. Overall, the wider benefits of the scheme in terms of housing delivery, the financial contribution towards affordable housing in the borough, and short-term economic benefits associated with construction and also land remediation should be given significant weight. Hence, those adverse impacts identified within the scheme, even when applying the tempered tilted balance, are not considered of such magnitude that they significantly and demonstrably outweigh the identified benefits of the proposal, as required by paragraph 11D of the NPPF. Indeed, they would be far less in the view of officers. Therefore, in applying the presumption of in favour of sustainable development and the tilted balance, it is recommended that planning permission should be granted subject to conditions, informatives and planning obligations in the main report, as amended by the changes indicated in the supplemental report. The supplemental report deals with the following. Various changes to the officer's report, including 1, clarification of the financial contribution of £330,000 towards affordable housing. 2, the extent of wildlife surveys provided to support the application. 3, clarity that ridge lines will be below those of the approved 5-unit scheme. The supplemental report also deals with some suggested revisions to conditions, including condition 6 to be removed, as this is already covered by condition 12 in terms of hours. Condition 8, access construction amended following initial drafting error. Condition 11, electric vehicle charging to be removed, as this is now covered by building regulations. Condition 17 on landscaping, remove reference to only hard landscaping, as that's covered in a separate condition. Condition 18, the LEMP condition amended following an earlier drafting error. Condition 26, building demolition. 27, restriction of PD rights and garages to be amended to car barns. And 29, condition to be removed as gates of a suitable design are proposed within the scheme. Finally, in terms of the supplemental report, there has been an update on contamination issues. An additional site investigation and risk assessment report has been submitted, which outlines the proposed action plan and results and methodology of the site investigation. This concludes that no gas remediation measures are necessary for the site and that there are limited soil remediation measures necessary. The Council's Environmental Health Officer has assessed the report, agrees with the findings and concludes that every necessary consideration has been given to the potential for land contamination at this stage. I also have a quick short verbal update, and we've received yet further updated supplemental site investigation and remediation strategy and verification plan from the applicant, which again has been assessed by the Council's Environmental Health Officer. And he's reiterated his view that the proposed remediation measures would be adequate. Hence, the Planning Committee can be reassured that the application is safe for human habitation, but a final verification report is still required, so condition 4 should still remain. And one further update is that the SUDS drainage conditions are missing from the update, and those are recommended to be deferred to officers for completion. In accordance with the flood risk sustainable drainage report that's been provided. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Andrew. That's a very thorough report. Right. First of all, we've got people that have registered to speak. The first one is Mark Lee, who's a resident. Mark, if you want to take a seat, you need to press your microphone. You have 3 minutes. Do you want any sort of reminder? No? Okay. You sound very organised.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak this evening. My name is Mark Lee. I've been a Woking resident and taxpayer since 1985, and I live on Tomlinson Drive, immediately adjacent to the site in question. I've been there since October 1992. And this site has always been a green gap between settlements, and we've alluded to the context of the very extensive past history of this site, and for decades, in fact, it's been subject to an excess of planning applications, contravention of planning conditions, and breaching enforcement notices. As residents, we've had to tolerate illegal dumping and burning of waste, significant noise from heavy vehicles, machinery and workers at any time from dawn till dusk. And as mentioned also, we've had to stomach having had an illegal car breakers yard at the site for several years. And I find it very hard to believe indeed that the area of this previous site is not heavily polluted by petrochemicals, toxins, bits of tyres and everything else. It's also been previously suggested that asbestos may be found there and that workers on the site might need to wear face masks. We were ignored from time to time again by the local authority and the environmental agency about all this in the past. There was an inquiry, a public inquiry here in 2021, and at the inquiry was admitted by the landowner's legal advocate that the scrapyard was placed there to intimidate local residents into accepting housing development as a lesser evil. And this was despite a previous planning appeal inquiry having deemed the site as being unsustainable for development. Later on, there was a threat from the landowner of further legal process in the form of judicial review, which energised the planning department there to accept on a marginal decision yet another planning application for 5 houses. Now, the local residents didn't decide not to oppose this on the condition that 5 houses would actually be the limit and they'd be suitable to safeguards in place. This was a deal brokered by the planning officers of this borough, and we now found they want to recommend a bigger, more expanded and unsuitable application, which is totally contrary to the previous agreement and not in keeping with the local area. I again want to mention, as you just did, this relevant activity on the land of movement of large quantities of earth from an area of the site in close proximity to 22 Tomlinson Drive. The owners brought this matter to the attention of the Borough Council over recent years and really have got no benefit from doing so. There would be significant loss of privacy from a 3-storey house on a raised area. I can certainly recall 2 very significant instances of vast amounts of surface water collecting at our end of Tomlinson Drive, despite the fact it's only supposed to be once a century. I've seen it happen at least twice, following very heavy, prolonged rain. And further building, which would inevitably prevent water egress and drainage, is only going to make the risk of an invasive flood much more likely. So I think that I'm sure there's pollution there. You're building it, it's being built on a raised part of land, which is going to cause all sorts of privacy. And I don't believe there isn't a big flooding risk. And I would urge you, please, to reject the applications. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. You had 2 seconds to go. The next speaker is Neil Davis, the agent.
Good evening. By way of background, as set out within the officer report, members will be aware that the site already has planning permission for 5 detached houses and that this is extant until June 2026. The principle of redeveloping the site for housing is therefore established, and this is the starting point for assessing any future planning applications. When the 5 detached scheme was determined, the council could only demonstrate between 4.35 to 4.92 year supply of housing. The current position is significantly worse, as the supply is now reduced to just 3.2 years. In seeking to introduce a further 3 dwellings onto a site that already has planning permission for residential development and where the tilted balance is engaged, the proposal will provide for a positive benefit towards addressing the shortfall. It will secure 8 much-needed family homes in a verdant setting that reflects the character of the area and the amenity of neighbouring properties. The spread of development reflects the physical built extent and road design of the earlier permission. The substantial landscape and wildlife corridor is maintained around the site's perimeter, and the separation distances retained to neighbouring properties. All of these are substantially in excess of the Borough Design Guide standards, ensuring that residents in both adjoining roads will not be materially affected by the changes proposed. All of the proposed dwellings will be of a 2-storey height and scale, with any accommodation above this level being purely incidental, confined to the roof voids. The ridge height of all the dwellings is 200 mm lower than the approved dwellings. The overall floor space proposed is not substantially greater than the existing permission, as the properties themselves will be smaller in floor area. The resultant plot sizes will still be substantially larger in size than the adjoining properties, and the overall density well below the current density levels in Tomlinson Drive and Johnson Drive, ensuring that it will still be sympathetic to the character of the area. The applicant has provided comprehensive reports that have all been accepted by officers covering ecologies, trees, highways and contamination. The applicant has responded positively to all of the consultee responses since the application was lodged, including providing additional information in respect to trees, ecology and ground conditions. All consultees are now fully supportive. The applicant, Palatine Homes, are a privately owned development company that specialise in high-quality residential developments. This proposal will secure important benefits, including 8 much-needed homes, a high-quality development, a policy-compliant affordable housing contribution of over $330,000, and preservation of the boundary tree and wildlife corridor. In summary, we firmly believe that this application should be supported and approved with the conditions recommended by officers, which are acceptable to my client. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Neil. Next is the ward member, Charles Margetts.
you, Chair. Before I start, I sent a presentation to Liam earlier. Could I just check that that's ready? And can I raise one other brief point? The committee have got the full agenda. 14 years of the planning history of this site is missing from this one. So this agenda, the planning list on here runs from 1997 to 2007. There's at least 14 years missing. It may be in the full agenda, I don't know, but it's important the committee are aware of that.
I believe it is in the full agenda.
Okay, thank you. Right, I'm ready.
So, sorry, bear with us a second, Chair, Vice Chair. We're just trying to get the presentation to load up.
I'll sit back. So, first slide, please. So, I want to recognise the committee has previously given consent for 5 houses on this site. Consent was given despite the fact that this site is not in the Finch Hampstead Neighbourhood Development Plan, WBC 2010 plan, or the emerging WBC local plan now at section 19. I believe the new scheme proposed tonight with 8 houses will create additional harms over and above the 5 houses and would ask that you reject this application. The first issue I'd like to draw to your attention is the levels from Tomlinson Drive in particular, which are reflected in the photo you can see there. Residents have long reported that 6 Johnson Drive, as you've heard earlier, has seen significant earth movement, which has raised the level where it borders Tomlinson Drive, so the ground level is approximately 2 metres higher, as you can see from the scale of the person there. The plot 6 in this application is 11 metres from the boundary. The application is for 2-storey houses with a roof basically on top, which means that anyone in the garden of plot 6 will be able to look straight into the 2nd floor of the next door houses of Tomlinson Drive and into any point in the gardens. This significant new harm has come about from the shift from 5 houses to 8 in this application. Next slide, please. The difference in level was raised with enforcement by residents in June last year. Enforcement officers visited the site in September and confirmed a significant difference in height. In that photo, you can actually see at the top of it where earth has been piled up on top of the bank. They also noticed piles of earth 1 to 1.5 metres tall across the site. Residents have reported to me since that the level has been raised even further. What is the intention of these piles of earth? Enforcement have told me that they've closed the case pending the decision of this committee, and it remains unresolved. There's no clear understanding of what's happened, where the land level is now, and nothing in place to protect the interests of neighbours. The landowner has, as you've heard, a 20-year history of breaching enforcement notice, planning abuse, and inflicting immense amounts of pain on his neighbours. It would be interesting to know if the piles of earth which were recorded by officers are still present. I would suggest on past behaviour they'll have gone. Planning officers have been made aware of this issue all along. However, no site visit took place for the planning committee on this issue, which has been raised since the initial application. You are being asked to make a decision with incomplete information, which could lead to significant harm to neighbours. Even if you're minded to accept the principle of 8 houses on this site, I would request that you defer this application so these issues can be resolved and the neighbours protected. Right, next slide, please. Flooding. You've heard a little bit about this. Sorry, my apologies. That's a house on Tomlinson Drive. The red line is the ground level of Johnson Drive before it, to give you a graphic idea of what this actually looks like. Next slide, please. Flooding. There's a problem, as you currently heard, with issues on Tomlinson Drive with water. That is a back garden of a house on Tomlinson Drive where Johnson Drive is right behind it. The land at Johnson Drive is vacant and has been for some time. I realise I'm out of time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Charles. Okay, Before I go into committee, could I ask the question about the site levels, please, Andrew? If you could update us on that as to where they are, what they are, etc.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Site levels. Levels have changed to a degree since the application was put in, not a result of the applicant, but the landowner has done some earth moving works on there, which are identified roughly on page 501 of the main agenda. We are looking at some relatively minor earth moving works identified by those blue areas on figure 8. So they do not represent a significant change of levels across the whole site. They are effectively spoil mounds. Now, as outlined on paragraphs 75 and 76, it's not unusual for development sites to be cleared and levelled before the development takes place. And the applicants advised that finished floor levels for the development would be undertaken, and we would secure those via a condition to ensure that they match the topographical survey that was taken out and conducted prior to these recent earth moving works being undertaken. So officers are absolutely sure that there'll be no significant raising of levels above the existing ground level such that it would have a harmful effect in terms of neighbours. And also in the sense that it would have any significant impact in terms of drainage or ecology either. In terms of drainage, the drainage measures proposed would be secured to ensure a greenfield runoff rate, and that's based on the whole development itself. Now, obviously, the road associated with the access road associated with the development would also be raised, but that's included within those drainage measures. So in terms of those levels, that's hopefully answer for you, Chair.
Thank you, Andrew. Could I just then ask, the site levels are the same now as they were when the 5 houses were given approval?
The blue areas indicated on page 501 are recent earth moving works that the landowner has undertaken since the 5-unit scheme was approved. However, as I've said, we can ensure that those levels across the site in terms of the development of the housing is not going to be significantly higher than the, shall we say, real levels to the site, which were surveyed as part of the topographical survey for the site. So we've got a kind of a last minute interjection by somebody having done these kind of, earth moving works. But as I said, that should be regraded across the site to reflect suitable levels.
Thank you. That's clarified it for me. Committee, is there anybody got any questions, any comments? Yes, Stuart.
I think one of the presentations that was given earlier mentioned that affordable housing was 330,000, yet it says in the agenda 496,000, which is the right number.
330, Stuart, and I put that in the supplemental report. Apologies, it was a drafting error on my part. And that would be policy compliant, 330.
Are there any other questions? Yes, Noreen.
Could you come and build me some houses for that? Yeah. You could build me 3 houses for that. I'll give you all the money you need. Just talking about the neighbourhood plan. Why did we think, sorry, let's start that again. Did you think the policy around, the approval around 5 versus 8 was not material, and therefore you didn't engage the neighbourhood plan? Because I have a thing about neighbourhood plans. I can't stand the way people spend 5 years of their life producing one, and then at every hurdle they get kicked into touch. And this has happened in Finchampstead before. So I just want to know why did you make the decision that it wasn't a material consideration in terms of it wasn't harmful and demonstrates, etc., all those lovely words that you use around demonstrably, etc. Not important, or did you feel that it was the principle of development was already accepted, and therefore 3 more houses, well, hey, it's not going to make much difference?
Thank you, Wayne. Yes, this is kind of outlined in paragraphs 30 and 31 in terms of the neighbourhood plan. So yes, it's a material consideration, but it has to also go through 2 tests where we have a position where we don't have a 4-year land supply. And the neighbourhood plan meets one of those tests. It meets test A, but it doesn't meet criteria B. So in that respect, it's not substantial enough to indicate a refusal would be appropriate.
Did you want to come back on that, Wayne?
No, I mean, it just makes a bit of a mockery of neighbourhood plans. I wish we wouldn't waste the money that we do across this country doing them.
If I could just jump in on the neighbourhood plan, as Andrew's just outlined, there's a number of criteria in national policy which allow a neighbourhood plan to, in effect, reverse the tilted balance if that neighbourhood plan meets a number of criteria. Obviously, this plan is recently adopted. If this plan was to meet all of criteria, it would need to allocate its own housing sites, okay, to meet its own identified needs. At the moment, the Finchampstead neighbourhood plan, as many neighbourhood plans do, rely upon, hopefully, the adoption of an LPU to meet their identified housing needs in future. So at the moment, this neighbourhood plan that we're dealing with doesn't front load and allocate its own housing sites within its own parish, and therefore it does not benefit from the release clause within the NPPF, which would in effect reverse the tilted balance, not in favour of development but against it. And that has been specifically put in to the NPPF in 2023 by national government in order to allow neighbourhood plans where it is allocating housing to appropriately resist development that's not in the neighbourhood plan. Very similar to the way local plans work. So ultimately, this neighbourhood plan is not in a position, even though being adopted, and even though, as Councillor Smith rightly says, you know, lots of work has gone into it, it's not in the position to reverse that tilt.
Thank you, Brian. Anybody else got any comments or questions? Yes, Greg.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to ask the officers about 3 particular points which have been raised in regard to harm that might be brought to this situation. First of all, I want to clarify, are you saying that the earth moving recently and the mounds that there are now are, you described them as temporary? So as part of the legal agreement, that's all going to be flattened out? That's my first question. The second question is about drainage. My reading of the report from officers suggests that the drainage problems that are taking place in, forget the name of the road, is it Tomlinson Road? There are existing drainage problems there. So are you saying that the drainage, as it's put together with this proposal, that's all going to be self-contained and in no way will add to any harm at Tomlinson Road? And the other point, which was raised by the ward councillor, Councillor Margetts, was about loss of privacy. And I just wanted some reassurance about because the siting of the closest house to Tomlinson
as I understand it, it's at a corner, and the measurements, when I looked at it, it seemed that it was relatively far away. But could you comment on the loss of privacy point, please, for the meeting?
Yes, thank you. So in terms of the earth moving works, no, they're not going to be required to be dealt with as part of the Section 106 or legal agreement, but they will be. The development is required under condition to provide levels plans, basically, to ensure that the topography of the site, as it existed before those earth moving works were undertaken, will reflect that. Now, there'll be some, obviously, changes in levels in respect of introducing the road and the houses themselves, obviously, but that will be dealt with in terms of the sustainable drainage as well. But yeah, a levels condition is effectively the answer. That's how it will be secured. Yeah. In terms of point 2, in terms of surface water drainage. Yes, you're quite right. Our drainage officers have assessed the application, and whilst we don't have a fully worked up drainage solution, from the information that has been provided thus far, they're confident that we can achieve greenfield runoff rates here, which means that the development will effectively consume its own smoke, so to speak, or water, as the case is here. So any water that runs off from the development can be appropriately dealt with, in the sense that if it was a greenfield site, the amount of runoff would be no greater than that. And we've also factored in the 40% for climate change measure as well, as advocated by the EA. In fact, the actual data it suggests there would be a marginal improvement in terms of the surface water flood risk arrangement. Yeah, and again, that would be secured by conditions which inadvertently were missed out, but we will put those on through discussion with our drainage officer. In terms of privacy, yes, the proposed dwellings are obviously large units, well spaced, and they meet the council's separation distances, both in terms of ensuring that there's no excessive encroachment on other properties, amenity, either in overbearing or overshadowing or overlooking aspects as well. So no amenity concerns.
Thank you, and thanks, Greg. I think those 3 concerns have been raised by a number of people, so it was good to get those answers. Anybody else want to raise a point? I've got Moses, then Sam.
I just wanted to confirm, the drainage, was it done for the 5 properties or for the 8?
Oh, it was done for the 8.
Sam.
Thank you. I think just looking over my notes, and I think my observations would be, I think this site is situated in a countryside area outside of the defined development limits. I think we need to consider that, which would violate, CP11 and AHD1 of the Finch Hampstead Neighbourhood Development Plan. So, again, Wayne's point, you do need to bear that in mind. I think that neighbourhood plan is key, and I think if we go against that, the other thing, I think this location does actually lack access to public transport. Most of the people in this area are very car dependent. So, so if this went ahead, this would again be contrary to sustainable development principles outlined in the NPPF and local policies. So I think, my reading of this is not a suitable location.
Thank you, Sam. And I think that would be relevant if we didn't already have the planning permission for 5 houses. But we're, again, between that rock and a hard place that we were on the last application, because there is a permission for 5 houses. So we're, in essence, looking at the impact of 3 extra houses. Did you want? No.
I wasn't saying.
Okay. So.
Yeah, Sam, I hear you. But I mean, if you reject this one, 5 houses will still be built, so that has already sort of, in a way, been approved by a past lot. So
just make the point that the neighbourhood plan was made or adopted after the 5 houses were built, so it was adopted at a point where the 5 houses development in principle was accepted. The conflict with it emerging and the conflict with the CP11 had already occurred.
So again, in terms of principle of development, that probably wouldn't be a good use of committee's time to discuss that more, the impact of the three.
Okay, well, could we look at that then, the principle of development, those extra three, disregarding all the other issues that we have. Anybody got any comments?
Shall I go through that?
Yeah.
Okay, then I'll just want to check with the committee again. So we, in June 2023, 5 dwellings have already been granted permission by the committee. And this will be a fallback option. So even if we would reject this case, 5 houses are still going to be built on this site. So in a way, do you guys agree that the principle of residential development on this site has been accepted? For landscape and character of the site, there were no objections from the landscaping officers. And do members agree with the planning officer that 3 additional dwellings above what has already been approved will not cause detrimental impact to the landscape side? The density is about 4.8 dwellings per hectare. It's certainly not a overdevelopment. Doesn't really compromise the gaps between settlements at this. That's already bridge crossed, I suppose. It is currently used as a commercial site for storage of building equipment, and it has been used in the past, as we said, for unauthorized car braking. Then if you go to housing mix and affordability, okay, this only caters for family houses, but in the Finch Hampstead neighborhood plan on page 68, appendix E, it states that the housing type in greatest demand in Finch Hampstead is properties for families. So this addresses that need. 5 houses. I could even see, like, these are 5 gigantic houses. I mean, now you're going to have 5, 8 more, maybe more normal family houses in it, but maybe that's my opinion. And although this scheme does not include affordable housing, it's sort of, we share that a commuted sum will be paid towards affordable housing in Wokingham Borough. And we mentioned in paragraph 71 that the distance to number 22 Tomlinson Close and the proposed plot 6 is in excess of 30 meters. And the minimum distance required is 12 meters. So the 30 meters probably avoids any significant overbearing presence. I noticed that the tree and landscaping Wokingham Borough had no objections. Issues raised can be mitigated through conditions. Ecology, Natural England had no objections. There will be a contribution per dwelling towards the SANG. Ecologists raised no objections subject to conditions. Highway access and parking. I mean, there's no access, no change in circumstances to make the site more accessible if you have 5 or 8. I noticed there were a lot of comments online from the residents regarding parking, which is already an issue on Johnson's Drive. And some of them raised concerns about no garages part of this one, but I noticed that the proposal provides 4 parking spaces per dwelling, which is quite significant. So I find it hard to see how 4 car spaces per dwellings could cause a significant issue on separate the parking issue in Johnson Drive, but I don't know what other people. That's a big one. Drainage we discussed. The drainage officer states that the surface water runoff can be suitably managed and secured via planning conditions. And then we also had an issue with the environmental health issues. Charles mentioned, he had concerns about the site investigations. First, I think the environmental health officers is satisfied that the site investigation shows no significant land contamination that will prevent development. He also says that the submitted reports are very comprehensive, use the best practices, and include an assessment of hydrocarbons contaminations. Maybe that partly addresses Charles's concerns. Condition the test also include to ensure that all the recommended work within the site investigation report will be carried out. And an asbestos management plan will be required in case that is needed. I think those are the most ones that I had. I don't know if anybody else had any.
Thank you, Martijn. That's,
Rick, go ahead.
Wait.
I think it's quite easy for us to sit here and say, well, that looks okay. But for as long as I've been on this council, this site has been a problem. When I was the exec member for planning, this site was a problem. You know, so I can imagine if you lived in that area, you know, it just blows me away why somebody in October of this year wanted to start to move ground soil around the site, knowing they've got an application coming up, you know, and you would say to yourself, oh, okay, in a normal site, that's normal, because you do start to clear a site prior to application, albeit you do it at risk. But on this site, I can understand why neighbours would be concerned while things are going on, because as one of the gentlemen said earlier, one of the residents, that, you know, we now know, don't we, that brake pads are one of the major causes of asbestos and asbestosis, etc. So what is actually in this site? Environmental Health have checked it, fine, and they're saying it's okay, but they're not living there. And the other thing was the photo that Charles showed us with Tomlinson Drive. Now, that water is affecting Tomlinson Drive now, and this is in effect a greenfield site. So to build on your point, well, we would expect it to consume its own smoke. Well, it's not doing that now. We've got a problem now. And that is being driven by these levels on this site. So I get why residents are sceptical. If they had had a nice neighbour for 20 years, I don't think this would be here this evening. But they haven't. So, you know, that's why it's, and I don't know how much this has cost us as a council, this enforcement on this side. Ridiculous amount of money. So I can understand, and, you know, I mean, when you look at it in the cold light of day, and you look at I think they're already advertising these houses online for sale. So you look at them, you think very, very nice, you know, 5 very large 5-bedroom houses. But I get why residents are concerned. But it then comes back to this rock and the hard place again. You know, the principle of 5's been accepted. Let's be honest, if this went to appeal, where would it get us? Because we haven't got a plan. Well, we've got a plan, it's gone, but it won't carry any weight until it's been adopted, which won't be till at the earliest, the beginning of 26. So this committee is in a very difficult position.
But I'm not sure that this even has to do with the plan. It has to do with demonstrating that 8 is significantly harmed than 5, I think, and that will be a challenge at the field. But go ahead, Sam.
Sorry, Sam, before you come in, the officer would like to just come back on some of those points that Wayne raised.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so just in terms of the history of the site and problems that neighbours have been experiencing for years, I did outline this at the start of my presentation in terms of what we can consider, what we can't consider. I've also outlined this in my original committee report at paragraph 150. And I state that, however, it should be noted that any ongoing antisocial behaviour or conclusion from previous enforcement investigations from the site are not material to determination of the current application. In accordance with Section 72 of the Town and Country Planning Act and Section 38(6) of the Planning and Compulsory Purchase Act, planning applications must be determined on their individual merits in accordance with the development plan, unless there are material considerations that indicate otherwise. So a landowner's previous past activity on a site is really not relevant. What you've got to consider is the application before you. On the second point about drainage, Wayne mentioning about the problems that are experienced at Tomlinson Drive, and my report picks up on this as well. Again, figure 10, page 511. You mentioned about there may be potential problems from the site in terms of the drainage running off into Tomlinson Drive. But I think from figure 10, I think we've got the situation here where Tomlinson Drive sits below the application site. The application site is in flood zone 1, so that's nothing that the applicant can control. The levels are what the levels are, and if the levels are higher than Tomlinson Drive, then water will always run off. And that's unfortunate, and it also needs to be borne in mind that a development, it also needs to be borne in mind that a development proposal cannot be required to assess existing problems on another site. It can only, Chair. A planning application can only be required to demonstrate that it consumes its own smoke, as we talked about, in terms of mitigating any problems from it. And in terms of drainage, as we've gone into length on this, it does. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that clarification. Sam, did you still want to raise something?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, and I think just hearing everything today and all the arguments, I think, what is it that we're voting on? The 5 have already been approved, right? So 5. So what we're saying is, do we think 8 is too many? And I think, in my opinion, looking at all the evidence, I would say it does represent an unjustifiable intensification of development in this area. If you look at the surrounding, looked at the area, looked at the surrounding houses and streets, and I think, the increase to that number would compromise the rural character of the area and exceed what I think are modest development limits suitable for this site, in the context of the site plus the area. So again, I think 8 is too many, and I would reject on that basis.
Can I just add, the density of the proposal is much lower than the surrounding areas, so I think it's that probably argument doesn't hold water. But is anybody else concerned about density? Moses, you want to bring something else in?
I just want to go back to what Andrew was saying, just some clarification. You're saying this new development is at a higher elevation compared to Tomlinson Drive. In terms of flooding, when you do a new development, are you not supposed to ensure that you don't exacerbate flooding in a nearby location?
Yes, correct. And the data that's been provided by the applicant and assessed by our drainage officer has indicated that the equivalent of greenfield runoff rates in terms of surface water drainage could be achieved here. So yes, and even a marginal improvement. So it goes marginally beyond what it is required to do in terms of surface water runoff. And the full details of the drainage strategy have not been provided yet, but enough information has been submitted to demonstrate that that can be achieved through variation of hydro breaks, so to speak, in terms of slowing the water off of the site through across the site and into the ground.
Thank you very much. I think we have covered Sorry, who?
I'm just trying to understand, if you do a drainage assessment for a particular location without extending it to a larger area, how do you conclude that it's not going to exacerbate the flooding in adjacent properties?
There are various ways you can deal with surface water, how it runs off from a development, and I'm not a drainage officer, I'm not a drainage expert, but there are ways and means of dealing with that. And it could be in terms of permeable paving, underground tanks to achieve a degree of betterment in terms of storage. So you might have an underground tank that gradually fills up if you've got a heavy rain event, and then it will only discharge that water at greenfield runoff rate. So it will only let it trickle out because you've got a volume of space that's holding that water. So it's one of a number of measures basically, and the full detail of that would be secured by condition.
Thank you very much. I think we have to accept that the drainage experts have this in hand and will be looking at it. And we need to make sure that they do. And that's as we go into the further development. Brian, did you want to say something?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just that's an important point, that no objection has been raised from your drainage officer. And in addition to that, the submitted flood risk and drainage assessment that has been provided with the application is deemed appropriate to be secured by condition, as the case officer outlined to you at the beginning. The intricacies and the details of that are not known as at this present stage, and they wouldn't necessarily be until you get to a more advanced stage and, you know, pre-planning is done. The important point again that's not been mentioned here is I know reference to how the current site performs has been talked about. Obviously, it doesn't perform well at all because it has no development or structural drainage on it. It is, as you've seen from the site photos, relatively open, undeveloped. It's not heavily landscaped. It's not managed in any particular way other than allowing water to just run over the surface of what is lightly grassed or mud or former breakage yard. It's not what anyone would class as a site that performs highly. When a site is developed, as the case officer shown in their presentation, and the houses are put in, houses are not built or not allowed to be built without drainage, whether that is through soakaways, suds, or attenuation tanks, hydro breaks. These are not uncommon things, and any new build house in the last 30 years will most likely have those features in. So this site is no different. Secondly, the site is not unlandscaped. In 5, 10, 15 years' time, if permission is granted, as with most new build housing estates, vegetation, structural tree planting, landscaping matures, and as everyone knows, a field, as you've seen, or a undeveloped area of land doesn't perform as well as a landscaped set of gardens, hedges, trees that are matured and grown. So there is another side to drainage which we can't quantify. And again, in the absence of any evidence, I would urge committee not to conclude that the site doesn't perform. But in the future, sites tend to also perform a role in terms of being vegetated. And I'd be very surprised if anyone's moved into a house and not planted any vegetation structurally in the time they're there, if not immediately. And the indicative plans, I believe, the full plans that were shown, the layout does show quite considerable undeveloped land and structural landscaping. So again, members would need to really bear that in mind. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I think, unfortunately, I couldn't quite make the site visit toward these places, because having read this report, I couldn't believe the history on this site. And I think the issue for me, and probably for the locals if I lived there, was why have they not built them since getting permission for 5? Is 8 the next step on the way to 12? Isn't that the elephant in the room? Yeah. I mean, you know, or 10 or any other number. And that's my concern.
Thank you. Well, as you know, we can only look at the plan that we've got in front of us, which is for 8. We can't second guess what the developers might do. There are real concerns about the site levels and drainage, which I know the officers have taken account of or have understood. I'd like to now draw to some sort of conclusion. I see Sam waving at me. Sam, can you be quick, please?
Sorry, just coming again on the density issues. I think, you know, if you look at you're on Johnson Drive, right? You come off Normal Ride. It's not a big close. It's a small close. And naturally, you know, you think we're thinking extra 3 houses, but that's potentially 4 spaces per each home. So an extra 12 cars potentially go in and out. I don't think if you look at Ditchell Road and you look, I think the excess noise pollution. I don't think, you know, imagine 12 cars going in and out of that small close every day. Can't see that being justified.
Chair, if I just may just jump in on that. The committee has been presented with quite a comprehensive report, and your highways officer has raised no objection in that regard. And again, it would be useful to bear in mind the technical advice you're being given in matters such as transport. And, you know, 3 houses, whether it's parking, access or highway capacity, is not considered to cause any harm.
Thank you. So could I have a proposal? Anybody got a proposal for moving on with this application? If not, I will propose from the chair that we follow the officer recommendation, bearing in mind we are between that rock and a hard place, and it's regrettably, to go for conditional approval. Do I have a seconder, please? Thank you. All those in favour of conditional approval, please show. All those against? And those abstaining? Thank you very much. That means that that has been given permission. There's one more item on the agenda, but I don't know if we want to wait till everybody leaves, or I can shout. Sorry, could you carry on outside? And we can go home.
Gentlemen, there are still some items to be discussed, so if you could speak outside.
Thank you very much. The final item, and I think we've had some of it already, which is decisions and updates. Brian, I think you've got something for us on that.
Thank you, Chair. Members of the committee will note the second item on the supplementary agenda, which, following a 6-month review and training session, was agreed to include in place of the non-householder appeal decision summary, which used to be presented to members every quarter. Previously, a list, quite a long list in some cases, of non-householder appeal decisions were presented, whether or not they affected or were determined at committee, went to appeal, so whether they were recommended for approval, refusal, or whatever, they were presented to members, and it didn't necessarily seem that this was as useful as it could be. And it was agreed that members would benefit from hearing updates from items they have discussed at committee, decisions that the committee has made, and or major decisions made under delegated authority, which have not come to committee, so that members, ward members, stay up to date and abreast of other strategic applications, which again will give the committee some context to some of the points raised tonight. So in terms of decisions and updates of note, bring members' attention to an appeal decision for an item determined in December last year at Planning Committee for 206 9 Mile Ride. In essence, a replacement dwelling for existing bungalow. Debated quite considerably on the evening. The appeal was allowed, contrary to the decision of committee to refuse. The Finch-Hampstead Neighbourhood Plan was referred to and discussed at length during that meeting over its reference to 3-storey houses. The inspector's been very clear in the interpretation of policy in the Finch-Hampstead Neighbourhood Plan. It's not a blanket ban on any 3-storey. It just provides a set of guidelines, and where there is no harm, again, they are the material considerations that would outweigh any conflict. So again, talking about our small-scale Finch-Hampstead Neighbourhood Plan up to a larger-scale local plan and national policy, you can see how inspectors and the councils are expected to apply policy. It is not law, it is a starting point, unless other material considerations indicate otherwise. Of note was that a number of points that the committee were concerned about in terms of overdevelopment and character of the area, but then the evidence didn't support those assertions, those reasons for refusal. It was written representations. It's just quite a useful small-scale decision, but again, undoubtedly we will be faced with similar scenarios in future, and obviously the feedback for the committee is quite valuable for everyone. The second item on there is a delegated item, and as we were talking about earlier, not all major applications are approved. Quite the contrary, only ones generally recommended for approval come to planning committee due to our scheme of delegation.
So you are confronted as members with the difficult decision of debating and determining applications that are ultimately recommended for approval and not refusal. Land between Lodge Road and Tape Lane in Hurst was refused at the very end of November, just under 2 weeks ago. A number of refusal reasons are identified there for you. If you want any more information on that delegated refusal, you can speak to myself or the case officer. Likewise, there is a new decision that was issued, I believe, today or yesterday for 24 Barkham Ride. Application has been refused under delegated as well. So again, that is not being brought to planning committee for you to debate. Last point on there, it has been referenced tonight, but and as discussed at some length at our 6-month review and workshop, the planning reform working paper has been released by central government, and I would urge members of the committee to read that working paper as to the government's intended direction for planning committees. And as we are a planning committee, the successful operation of our committee is paramount to all of us in making robust decisions. And as we progress forward, it is likely, there will be more contact from officers in terms of making sure we are doing everything we can and we're doing it in a justified and transparent way. So please do make yourselves aware of that. The three, just for your own benefit, the three key actions that seem to be proposed are national schemes of delegations, strategic planning committees, and mandatory training. Other items are also discussed in terms of the size of committee and how committees operate. So again, very important that we are performing as we should be performing moving forward. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Brian. Right, that concludes the meeting. Thank you very much and safe journey home. Oh, and happy Christmas, everybody. So don't think